Hey everybody on YouTube, this is Kyle Snyder once again, aka Clipton, doing yet another video. This one's going to involve who I expect to succeed in the National Football League. More specifically, who I think is going to make it to the playoffs. And there have been some interesting developments that have happened ever since the offseason with the draft and the OTAs, and basically, I'm going to go down my list of teams who I expect to make it to the playoffs. I'm going to start with the AFC first, starting with the North or the East Division. I believe the New York Jets are going to win the East Division. They played very well this last season. They made it to the wild card round, made it all the way to the AFC Championships, in which they fell short to the Colts 30-17, and I really believe that the Jets are definitely going to make it back to the playoffs with Mark Sanchez as their quarterback and Rex Ryan, both of which were rookies, and they made a huge statement last season. Let's see. Next up is the North Division, I believe. I think it's the North. But I believe the Ravens are going to take that. They've got an excellent defense, and they got a good quarterback, Joe Flacco. He's only played for 2 seasons, I believe, both of which he's made it to the playoffs, one of which he made it all the way to the AFC Championship. But I believe they're going to make it to the playoffs again, and with this being Ed Reed's last season, possibly, you got to imagine he'd go out with a bang. Let's see. Next up, the South Division. I believe the Indianapolis Colts are going to take the AFC South once again because they were a powerhouse last season. They made it all the way to the Super Bowl. They could have gotten a perfect season during the regular season, but because they were concerned about their starters potentially getting injured, they threw away the perfect season. But you gotta imagine that this season, they're definitely going to make it to the playoffs again. They got Manning, they got Reggie Wayne, Joseph Adai, and a lot of other people. So you gotta imagine they're gonna make it definitely. And then for the West Division, I really believe the Raiders are finally gonna break out of their losing seasons. That with some of the acquisitions that they got in the draft, with Jason Campbell now going to be their starting quarterback, you gotta imagine that we'd eventually see the Raiders of old again, that the Raiders are definitely going to come back. And for the 2 teams that I believe are going to be wildcard teams in the AFC, I believe the Cleveland Browns, they've made some good acquisitions. And near the end of their last season, they were on a 4-game winning streak, one of which was against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who were the defending Super Bowl champions. So you gotta imagine that if the Browns play with that same intensity, they're going to definitely make it to the playoffs. And plus, with some of their draft acquisitions, yes, I know Colt McCoy is not going to be the starting quarterback. That spot's reserved for Jake the Snake Delhomme, who formerly played for the Carolina Panthers. And the other wildcard team I think is going to make it is the Houston Texans. Yes, I know Brian Cushing got suspended for a drug violation, but I do believe that with some of the acquisitions they got in the draft, and with some of the training they've been doing, I believe they can be a wild card team. They almost made it to the playoffs last season. And let's see. Next up, the NFC. Starting with the teams I believe are going to take the division titles. First up, the Dallas Cowboys. They took the division title last season, but just barely, and I believe they're going to do the same again. And, you gotta imagine with the Super Bowl 45 taking place in their arena, that gives them extra motivation to want to win the division and make it all the way to the Super Bowl. And let's see. Then we got the Green Bay Packers. They had an excellent season last season, but fell short in the wild card game against the Cardinals, 51-45, which I believe was a very good game. It could have gone either way, but in the end, the Cardinals beat them in a defensive play in overtime. See, next up, the New Orleans Saints, the defending Super Bowl champions. Gotta go for them. I mean, they got Sean Payton as their head coach. They got Drew Brees as their quarterback. They got a lot of other good players, Reggie Bush, and a few others. So yeah, the Saints are definitely a team to go for the playoffs. And finally, the San Francisco 49ers. Because they had an 8-8 season last season, and with some of the draft picks that they got, you gotta imagine that they are going to be a good team this season. I mean, Mike Singletary, it's kind of too early for me to judge how well of a coach he is. I mean, he had an 8-8 season last season, and who knows how well he's going to do as a coach this upcoming season. And the two wildcard teams I believe are going to make it are the Minnesota Vikings. I say the Minnesota Vikings are going to be wildcard because who knows if Brett Favre's going to come back, and I believe the Vikings can make it without Brett Favre if Favre doesn't come back. And the other team, the Seattle Seahawks, because of their draft choices and the way that things have been shaping up for them recently. I mean, even though they had a 6-10 season last season, I believe this season's going to be different for them. And here are some teams that I believe are not going to make it to the playoffs. The Buffalo Bills, the Detroit Lions, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Chicago Bears, and the Philadelphia Eagles. I say the main reasons why I say the Bills, the Lions, the Jaguars, well, not the Lions, but the Bills, the Jaguars, and the Bears are not going to go to the playoffs is because, well, with the Bills and Jaguars, I believe they made some poor choices in draft choices, and plus the Bills have a long history of choking, and the Jaguars, I don't see them improving from last season. Let's see. The Lions, even though they got some good draft picks, I don't think it's going to be enough for them to make it to the playoffs. They'll definitely do better than 2-14 this season. Hopefully we won't see another 0-16 otherwise. Then they definitely would be the worst franchise in NFL history. And the Chicago Bears, they didn't really get a lot of draft choices, and I don't really see them improving much from last season. And let's see. As for the Philadelphia Eagles, why I say they are not going to go to the playoffs is because they traded away Donovan McNabb, and I don't know how Cobb's gonna do. I mean, I don't really see Cobb being a playoff-worthy quarterback, and who knows if Michael Vick's gonna be playing that season. Who knows? But yeah, those are my predictions on who I believe is going to make it to the playoffs and who isn't. Personally, I would like to see the Colts make it to the Super Bowl again and win it. But, anything can happen in the NFL. I mean, we've seen it season after season after season. I mean, we've seen upsets, we've seen injuries that have debilitated teams, we've seen plays that have just crushed teams. We've seen a whole lot happen. And who knows, there may be one or two controversial games this season, as there are pretty much every season. One of the controversial games had to be the wild card game between the Packers and the Cardinals with that incidental face mask, which of course wasn't called because there was no twisting or pulling of the face mask, so no penalty there. And the New Orleans Saints versus Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship with the replay booth the booth review after booth review after booth review in overtime. It's like the first two I knew weren't going to get overturned. The third one, it could have gone either way. I was actually expecting it to get overturned. I was surprised it didn't. But anyways, those are my thoughts on what's going to happen next season, who's going to succeed and who isn't. I'm Kyle Snyder. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you for the next season of the NFL.